Welcome to the realm of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Enjoy listening. Howard Boerwinkle was well aware that he was nearing the end of his life. Though his mind and ambitions still made him feel young, his body could no longer keep up. He had spent decades working at the Space Research Institute and had retired some years ago. Now, he felt it was time to inform his old colleagues about his condition. Upon arriving at the Institute, Howard gathered his closest friends and calmly told them that his body could no longer sustain life and that he felt as if he could die at any moment. The room fell into a deep silence. The one who reacted the strongest was Mark Orton, a longtime friend and fellow researcher who was close to Howard in age. Mark shook his head vigorously. "That's impossible. You're not going to die, Howard," he declared, refusing to accept the truth. Howard placed a gentle hand on his friend's shoulder. "Mark, you have to let this go. Every human being must die one day. It's the natural order of things." But Mark refused to listen. Instead, he marched over to the communication station and picked up the phone, dialing a secure line to a contact in one of the space colonies. "Howard Boerwinkle," Mark said into the receiver, his voice firm. "I want you to prepare the best doctors and administer the life extension formula to him immediately." Hearing these words, Howard stood up and walked over to Mark. "What are you doing?" he asked, baffled. Mark simply raised a hand, signaling for Howard to wait. After finishing his call, he turned to his old friend with determination. "Howard, you know how much you mean to me. Yes, we all die one day, but that day is not today," Mark said firmly. "Tomorrow, we're going to Astrospace Colony, and we're going to extend your life. No arguments. I love you, my friend." Howard, though deeply moved, still attempted to protest, but Mark was resolute. Defeated, Howard returned home, where he spent the evening looking through old photographs of his youth. The faces in the pictures felt like they belonged to someone else, yet he still remembered every detail, as if they had been taken yesterday. Time had been cruelly fast, and though Howard was wise enough to accept that, it still saddened him. As he lay in bed that night, Howard felt as though he might not even wake up the next morning. Memories of his past played in his mind, and a few silent tears slipped from his eyes. Just as he was drifting off to sleep, his phone rang. It was Mark. "Howard, I'll be at your place first thing in the morning. We'll head to the base, and then straight to the colony. After that, a whole new life awaits you. Trust me," Mark said before hanging up, not waiting for a response. Howard never doubted his friend. As thoughts swirled in his head, he slowly drifted into slumber. At dawn, he woke up, prepared a light breakfast, and dressed. When he heard a car horn outside, he knew Mark had arrived. Stepping outside, he climbed into the passenger seat. As they drove to the Space Research Base, Howard gazed out the window. The sky was a brilliant blue, with clouds drifting lazily, as if inviting him toward the stars. Upon arrival, Howard was struck by the vastness and technological sophistication of the facility. Mark wasted no time, leading him straight to the spacecraft. Just before stepping aboard, Howard hesitated. He turned to Mark. "Are you sure this will work? I mean, I'm not the man I used to be. Maybe this is just the way things are meant to be." Mark placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Howard, I would never deceive you. The technology we have now is beyond anything you can imagine. The best doctors in the galaxy are waiting for you. Trust me." Reassured, Howard followed Mark onto the ship, and soon they were soaring into the cosmos. As they traveled, Howard turned to his friend. "So, these doctors, how exactly do they plan to make me young again?" Mark chuckled. "Oh, you'll see. It's a special formula that rejuvenates cells. Let's just say, you're going to feel a lot better very soon." Though Howard still had doubts, he chose to trust Mark. When they reached the Astrospace Colony, Howard was immediately taken to a medical facility. The hospital room was pristine, filled with advanced equipment that looked far beyond anything he had seen before. A few moments later, the door opened and a woman entered. She was unlike any Dr. Howard had ever encountered. She wore a revealing, form-fitting uniform of burgundy and silver, her movements graceful yet authoritative. She smiled warmly. "Mr. Boerwinkle, my name is Laura," she said. "Soon, my colleague Pora will join us. But first, let's get you prepared." Howard hesitated for a moment before beginning to remove his clothes, feeling a touch of embarrassment. Laura assisted him, and just as he settled onto the medical bed, another woman walked in. "This is Pora," Laura introduced. Pora, equally striking in appearance, approached with a small syringe. "Relax, Mr. Boerwinkle. This will make you feel at ease," she said gently, injecting a tranquilizer into his arm. As the sedative took effect, Howard watched with drowsy eyes as the women prepared a vial of liquid, seemingly extracted from their own bodies. Laura leaned in. "Now, open your mouth, please." Howard, too relaxed to resist, obeyed. Pora poured the mysterious fluid into his mouth. The moment he swallowed, a strange warmth spread through his body. Laura gently pressed a hand against his forehead. "You're doing great. This will restore your cells and return your youth. Just rest." Howard closed his eyes, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. Memories of his youth flooded his mind, but this time they didn't feel distant. They felt real, as though he was truly reliving them. As the process continued, subtle changes began to manifest. His skin tightened, wrinkles faded, and his body felt stronger. Howard slowly opened his eyes, astonished by the energy surging through him. What happened?" he murmured. Laura smiled. "The process was a success. We transferred a substance from our bodies into yours. It will keep you young and strong for years to come. Enjoy your new life, Mr. Boerwinkle." Pora, standing beside the bed, smirked. "But if you want to become even younger, I can offer you more. But there's a condition. You must take me with you to Earth, and in return, I want a share of your wealth." Howard didn't even need to think. "Deal," he said with a grin. Moments later, he stood from the bed, feeling rejuvenated. He quickly found Mark and greeted him with a confident smile. "Mark, meet my new wife," Howard announced, gesturing to Pora. Mark was stunned but quickly burst into laughter. "Well, I didn't see that coming. But if you're happy, I'm happy." Together, the three of them boarded the spaceship. When they returned to Earth, Howard stepped out of the car and looked at his house, the same house he had left as an old man. But now, everything felt different. The weight of age had been lifted from his body, his joints no longer ached, and his vision was sharp and clear. The very air smelled fresher, more alive. Mark patted him on the back with a wide grin. "Well, how does it feel, Howard? Like a miracle, right?" Howard stretched his arms, feeling the strength coursing through his renewed muscles. He clenched his fists, then relaxed them, testing the responsiveness of his fingers. His skin was smooth again, the frailty of old age replaced with a vigor he hadn't felt in decades. He turned to Mark, his eyes filled with wonder. "It's unbelievable," he admitted. "I don't even know how to describe it. I feel like I'm in my 30s again, maybe even younger." Pora, standing beside him, smiled seductively and linked her arm with his. "And it's only the beginning," she whispered in his ear. "You and I, Howard, we are going to enjoy this new life together." Howard felt a rush of excitement, not just from his youthful body, but from the possibilities ahead. He wasn't just some old man who had cheated death. He was a man with a second chance, a man with a beautiful woman by his side, and an entire future ahead of him. They entered the house, and Howard took a deep breath, absorbing the familiar scent of old wood, books, and the faint aroma of coffee. The house itself hadn't changed, but for the first time in years, it felt like a home again. His old photos were still there, sitting on a mantelpiece. He walked over and picked up a picture of his younger self, standing next to his late wife. A bittersweet smile formed on his lips. Mark noticed and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She wants you to live, Howard. To really live." Howard nodded. He wasn't replacing the past, he was embracing the future. He turned to Pora, who was already exploring the house, curiously touching the books on the shelf. "So," he said, clearing his throat, "you're really staying here with me?" She looked at him playfully. "Didn't I say I would? I made a deal, and I always keep my word. Howard chuckled. Then I guess we should make this place feel a little more like home for you, too. That night, as Howard lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he realized how drastically his life had changed in just a matter of days. From accepting death to receiving a second youth. From living alone to having a beautiful, mysterious woman by his side. The weight of old age, which had once pressed down on him like an immovable burden, was now nothing more than a distant memory. He turned his head slightly to the side, glancing at Pora, who was lying beside him. She was awake, her piercing eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight streaming through the window. She was unlike any woman he had ever met, otherworldly, confident, and alluring. "You're thinking too much," she murmured, her voice smooth like silk. Howard exhaled, a half-smile forming on his lips. "Can you blame me? A few days ago, I thought I was at the end of my road. Now, I have a whole new life ahead of me. It still doesn't feel real." Pora propped herself up on one elbow and traced a gentle finger along his jawline. "It is real, Howard. You're proof of it. You can either keep questioning it or start living it." Howard reached for her hand, holding it in his. It was warm, smooth, and strong. "I want to live it," he admitted. "But what does that even mean now? I spent my whole life working, getting old, preparing for the end. Now, I don't have to worry about that. I have no idea what comes next." Pora's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Then, I guess it's time to figure it out." Howard woke up feeling more refreshed than he had in decades. His body was light, energetic, and full of life. As he stretched, the sound of birds chirping outside filled the room. He turned to see Pora, already awake, standing by the window, wearing one of his dress shirts. The sight of her, bathed in morning light, made him smile. "Good morning," he said, sitting up. She turned to him, tilting her head slightly. "I made coffee," she said, holding up a steaming mug. Howard chuckled and got out of bed. "You're adapting to Earth life pretty fast." She handed him the mug and smirked. "I learn quickly, and I plan on staying, so I might as well get used to it." Howard sipped his coffee, letting the warmth spread through him. As he gazed out the window, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, excitement for the future. Mark arrived a few hours later, knocking on the door with a broad grin. "Well, look at you," he exclaimed as Howard opened the door. "You look like you're ready to run a marathon." Howard laughed. "I feel like I could. I might even beat you in a race now, Mark." Mark stepped inside and nodded toward Pora, who was lounging on the couch with a book in her hands. "And I see you've got yourself some company." Howard glanced at her and then back at Mark. "Pora's staying with me. We have an arrangement." Mark raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. "Well, whatever it is, I'm just glad to see you alive and well. And not just well, thriving." Howard nodded. "I owe you for this, Mark. If it weren't for you, I'd probably be in a hospital bed right now, waiting for the inevitable." Mark clapped a hand on Howard's shoulder. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what any friend would do. Besides, I always knew you weren't done yet." Howard smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. For Mark, for Pora, and for the second chance he had been given. Over the next few weeks, Howard and Pora settled into a routine. She explored Earth with curiosity, fascinated by everything from the taste of fresh fruit to the way the wind felt against her skin. Howard, in turn, found himself experiencing the world through fresh eyes, rediscovering the simple joys he had long taken for granted. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. "You know," Howard said, leaning back in his chair, "I used to think that growing old was just part of life, that once you reach a certain point, all you can do is wait for the end. But now, I feel like I have all the time in the world." Pora smirked. "That's because you do, and we're going to make the most of it." Howard reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Then let's do just that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Howard Boerwinkle, the man who had once accepted his fate, embraced his new life with open arms. He had been given a second chance, and this time he was going to live it to the fullest. And for the first time in years, he truly felt alive.